Papers and the meaning of the Pentagon Papers to what is happening in America, and were they significant? The revelation of some truths, the way the government was escalating the war or killing DM. And at the time that I did this broadcast here, I said that the really important disclosure that the country has to face is the assassinations of the president, the senator, the civil rights leaders, and that the Pentagon Papers was a start of one man working within the system, working with the National Security Council, Daniel Ellsberg, who had a conscience, saw that this country was going wrong by lying and deception, and put his life on the line to tell people some truths about this country. And it is a valuable book. People should read it and support him. And they should be giving him support during his trial with letters, which most people fail to do, I know. Well, at the same time I was doing this show on KLRB, and Pentagon Papers were discussed all over the world, Mr. Prouty was interviewed in the British Broadcasting. And Prouty got up in London and said that the only thing that was important in this world was the truth about the assassinations. And as far as I know, in terms of radio work, I hear from other researchers all over, we were the only two people that day that were on the air, one in Carmel, one in London, talking about the political assassinations as being the real truth to be divulged, and that the Pentagon Papers was a stepping stone in preparation for what would really come down someday. Well, Prouty is a member of the Committee to Investigate Assassinations. Along with me, I'm a member of that group to find out who, we know who's committing these conspiracies, but we want the Washington public officials to expose them. And the Committee to Investigate Assassinations is in Washington, D.C., run by Bernard Fensterwald. And Prouty is a member of that particular group. And when the Watergate arrest broke in June, I was called Washington to speak to Bud Fensterwald, and I spoke to Prouty that day. He was having lunch with Prouty that day. And I said, I think this is our team. This is the same team. I recognize the names. Well, you see, Prouty knows more about the CIA than I do, but we both know about the John Kennedy assassination. So one of the revelations that Jack Anderson has from Prouty's book is that in 1959, one of the CIA chief, Allen Dulles' spy planes, allegedly flew down over Russia. The crew was questioned by Soviet intelligence and returned quietly to the United States, where they were debriefed by others. Among others was James McCord, a former CIA man convicted in the Watergate scandal. So Prouty recognized that name immediately from his CIA work and the debriefing at the time. But from my research, I knew that Lee Harvey Oswald was in the Soviet Union in 1959 as an intelligent agent and was partly responsible for bringing down, with radar techniques testing, these U-2 flights over the Soviet Union. Gary Powers mentions him in his book, as a matter of fact. That was Oswald's role as an agent of Allen Dulles' CIA. So you have the whole cycle, James McCord, Allen Dulles, and Lee Harvey Oswald, the spy planes. There's a whole milieu in the years of 59, 60 to 63, and on up to the Watergate that were working together. And Prouty will bring out some of this in his book. His book is on the dirty tricks department of the Central Intelligence Agency, written by a man who was a part or knew it. Now, the CIA can't stop his book. The book is called The Secret Team. They tried to stop Victor Marchetti's book, and they did temporarily, on the basis that Marchetti was an employee of the team of the CIA and therefore couldn't reveal the dirty tricks. But evidently there's a technicality in Prouty that he was an advisor over in England and wasn't on the books as an employee. He had a different label so he could get away with what he's doing without being arrested, or they can't stop the book. The book is going through and will be out very shortly. About a week or two ago, we did a thing on natural disasters. I talk a lot about martial law because when we talk about the Watergate team, that was the group that would instigate martial law, but because of members of the team being arrested at the Watergate Hotel, there's another alternate plan, I'm convinced, for taking over control of the United States, and it will be at a time of emergency, which has to do with the two-way radio into your home and the TV. and the booklets we talked about at length on another program. Well, this week, for those of you who listened to that, there was an article that the Bay Area is warned of potential disasters from tidal waves. Now, there's a book that I've recommended many, many times called Project Paperclip by Clarence Lasby on how the space scientists would cause certain natural disasters to take place to bring drought to one group and water to another, to control through the space satellites the climate and the weather in order to control the people or the vegetation. You starve a few, you feed a few, you move the clouds and the weather, the climate, to protect the people that you want, and you eliminate the others by bringing drought and natural disasters. And the warning, the big controls, we talk about these two-way radios to protect us. The public relations firms sell you, like they did in Nazi Germany. All this is for your own good. So when I read in the Chronicle this week that the Bay Area is warned of potential disasters from tidal waves that come every 200 years that could wipe out all of San Francisco, and they tell about future earthquakes and tidal waves, I have to read where the study is done. Is it done by government-connected people? Who is going to predict these tidal waves that I'm predicting are bound to happen, or some typical form of disaster? So it turns out that from Menlo Park, where a lot of studies are done for our government on these particular things, this evacuating warning system is being built up. And it's done by the environment study conducted by the U.S. Interior Department and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. They are warning us about these huge tidal waves are going to happen, and the United States government, the same departments, would have you all wired for sound, two-way, for the big tidal wave or earthquake that's going to come. This fits in with natural disasters. Watch for these predictions and things, and then when they come, they can say, see, we just predicted this, there it is. I'm very suspicious of after reading Project Paperclip, that we're going to have a flood of natural disasters. And speaking of natural disasters and some that aren't so natural, we're going to jump onto the airplane evidence, because the news is flooding, and when you talk about accidents and disasters and airplane crashes and planes without pilots, every week new information comes in on things that I'm suspecting, like the airplane crash in Miami at Christmas, the one over Chicago where Mrs. Hunt was on. She's the wife of the Watergate Howard Hunt. This week there was news about some new plane crashes. The plane crash that went down December the 8th over Chicago, the one that Mrs. Hunt was on. An article this week came out. William Lamb, from the safety inspector from the National Transportation Board, said the last words of the pilot he possibly ushered were, "I'm sorry." Now this was April the 8th, and he's saying, "I'm sorry." March the 1st, they find out he's sorry. I have classified, when I did my research for 8 years on just the testimony before the Warren Commission, there was evidence, some destroyed, some delayed, some evidence is altered, some is missing. But under delayed is the kind of thing where they go through every possession of Lee Harvey Oswald's in a garage and take it out and make an inventory. But then when they find a camera with some film later and they have to attribute it to him, they go back in the garage and they say, oh, this was there, we didn't see it. Even though the FBI says, no, it couldn't be there, we went through every box. They say, oh, yeah, that was there, and that's delayed evidence. Evidence comes in to fit the facts later, and that's all it is. It's simply delayed. They can bring it in from anywhere. It's like with the ITT memo that came up. Dita Baird admitted that she signed the memo, it was hers, and the White House didn't like that, so they get Intertel in, and they go out to Dita Baird, and 3 weeks later she says, no, I didn't sign that, that was planted on me. That, if I had 20 in help working every day, we could really get this system down beautifully and cross-file. I used to have a lot of help before, and I don't have now, and these things should really be systematically put into their proper place, because this is delayed evidence coming in that she said, I'm sorry. The pilot says, I'm sorry. Now, the article was in the Washington Post and goes on to mention that the people killed in the plane were Chicago Congressman George Collins, a Democrat, and Michelle Clark, a CBS correspondent. They don't even mention Mrs. Hunt's name in the article now at this point, when his name is in the news almost every day in connection with Donald Segretti and the Watergate. Now, the Miami plane crash this week, March the 6th, there's a little article that the throttle may have caused problems. First, we heard there were some birds in the jet pilot. Now, there's an unexplained throttle noise. The article came in this week. The Eastern Airline jumbo jet apparently had a series of unexplained problems. Watch for the apparentlys, the probablys. They could have happened. They're still trying to explain the Miami plane, and I think those 3 planes crashed at one time, and the Alameda one up north, as test cases to see what, to hide, first of all, the Chicago crash, which was the important one, and to make these planes uncertain for something future when they want another person on these planes. It sounds a little paranoid to just throw these things out to you, but I have followed them very carefully. I once did a show at the time that the buildings burned down at Fort Ord, the theaters, and it was the same week that Terry Magnet was talking in front of the congressional committees about violence and provocateurs at Seaside, and it was the day before Westmoreland was supposed to visit Fort Ord. And I felt that the timing of their visit and the way those theaters were set up, that there were provocateurs. And there's somebody floating around the Big Sur area now who is telling people that he knows who did it or was part of it, that he was a provocateur. I don't close those cases until the files are really sure, and I watch all the evidence come in when I think they're setups. When people want to give certain testimony or effect a change, these things happen just at that time, and it's just too convenient, and the investigation of the cases is always left hanging, and you can't really find who did them. Richard Nixon made an appointment this week of Alexander Butterfield to be the head of the Federal Aviation Administration. And he got caught because Mr. Butterfield was still an Air Force commission. He wasn't discharged from the Air Force. This is a problem when you're talking about a military takeover in the United States, and you see the Pentagon running every single thing. The man who's in the Air Force will decide what are airplane crashes, how many, he will help as the head of the FAA, but he is a military man. Well, he got caught because he was supposed to resign from the military one day before he became the head of the Air Force. So he had to back out. Richard Nixon had to back out on the appointment of Alexander Butterfield till he decides to resign from the Air Force because he can't be both. That's very considerate of him, but it's just paperwork one way or the other. It's paperwork. Now, I'm talking about evidence that's delayed and evidence that is confusing and not certain. And I'm going to talk about evidence altered because this is the most outrageous part of political assassinations, is the flagrant way that the information is destroyed that would prove that particular people are selected patsies and that the domestic intelligence is committing these particular crimes. In our own area, in Santa Cruz, this week, there was an article about a boy whose brother was killed up in Felton. He's one of those boys of the 4 who was killed at the campsite. And he said, and Jeffrey Card said, when you killed my brother, whoever did it, you also killed a dream. So Jeffrey went up to the house where the boys lived that was broken into when they were killed. 4 boys were camping. They weren't hurting anybody. And he went up to the area, and he went with somebody else. And I'm going to read you a quote of this article because it pertains to the massacres in Santa Cruz now and the one that happened in the Oda family just a little while ago. This brother said he went up to the place where the campsite had been, and he said that a crew of youngsters, watch it, of the youth conservation camp had torn down both the house and another across the canyon where some people had lived for a while. That, you know what it looks like now? Like nothing had ever been there. They buried a lot of stuff. They burned all the wood. They scattered the leaves and branches around, so the last time I missed it entirely and had to dumble back and find it. Now, for those of you who live in the Santa Cruz area, the youth conservation camp, do your own research. People call me and they do their own investigations, just like the NAACP did about the Kitty Hawk riot. Do your own research. Find out what age group those youngsters were, because I'm going to talk about youngsters in it with the Stennis shooting. who gave